there, and welcome to our show, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. I'm Bianca Murray, and I'm joined by Carly Waters and Cece Lira from PS Literary Agency. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Books with Hooks. Today we have our author joining us, which we're very excited about. Tali, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Bianca. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you here. Will you please kick us off by reading your query letter?
Of course, I'd be delighted to. Dear Cece, Carly, and Bianca, thank you for having me on Books with Hooks. I'm a big fan of the podcast, which has been an incredible resource throughout my writing journey. This query was tailored with Cece in mind, as her wish list mentions a desire for stories centered around social justice and feminist issues, core themes in my manuscript. I so appreciate the opportunity to share my work with you. I am seeking representation for The Color of Blood, a 70,000-word coming-of-age horror-mance. The novel blends Latvian mythology and folklore with an examination of critical theory similar to Blood over Brighthaven, the Gothic horror and exploitation of Mexican Gothic, and the Eastern European setting of Juniper and Thorn. In 1900 Latvia, women combined their blood with pigment to create magical art that comes to life. Stasi, an ambitious painter, is chosen to compete for a coveted art residency hosted by the von Nachtraben family, Europe's most powerful paint magnate. But rumor has it a past competitor was terribly disfigured. Still, Stasi eagerly accepts. After all, the competition is a chance to elevate her social standing, earn her emotionally distant parents' approval, and escape the brothel where she secretly works. At the von Nachtraben estate, Stasi is forced to share a room with Helmi, her art school rival. Even worse, the grisly rumor becomes all too real. A fellow competitor is gruesomely killed, forcing Stasi and Helmi to set aside their differences and uncover the dark truth behind the competition. When their investigation leads them to a toxic green pigment engineered to weaken women who paint, they suspect the purpose of the competition isn't to identify the strongest magical women, but to eliminate them. As a forbidden sapphic romance kindles between Stasi and Helmi, and more women perish, the rivals to lovers navigate deadly trials, backstabbing competitors, and the von Nachtraben's insidious web of control. Stasi will risk her love and her life to stop the elite intent on silencing women and upend the rarefied world she once longed to join. I'm a neurodivergent PhD candidate. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in environmental studies and a minor in French, concentrating on French literature and linguistics. I later earned a JD MBA with distinction, but after several years practicing corporate law, I found that drafting contracts and closing deals left little room for creative expression. Since then, my passion for storytelling has taken over my life, and I won my first writing contest, the 7 Stories Writing Competition. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'd be thrilled to share this story with you. And that comes in at 368 words without the personalization.
Amazing, Tali. Thank you so much. Okay, Cece, we're going to throw it over to you.
This is such a brilliant query letter. You did such a good job reading it too. You know how to write and read a query letter. It's really impressive. Truly, I read this query letter, and you'll see this in my notes, and our Substack supporters will too. I really want a coming of age horror romance. Like, the plot points were just killing me in the best way. You gave me exactly what I needed to know in terms of the journey, in terms of the escalation. Like, I literally wrote in the margins, "You are killing me in the best way." It's perfect as is, and you should be very proud of it. If you want me to be super, super, super nitpicky, because you're on the show and you're asking for advice, there could be potential to sharpen the why her angle. Like, right now, it could be any student's story. Like, why is she the one to fight the good fight? But truthfully, like, just saying, I don't actually need to know the answer to this, because if this had been in my query inbox, I would have been like, oh my gosh, yes, scrolling down to read this with urgency, with pleasure, with curiosity, which is exactly the goal. So congratulations.
Thank you, Cece. Okay, Carly, handing it across to you now.
All right. So my goal this summer is to help everybody work on their hooks. In our last episode where we did a query letter, I went through some examples of different ways to write your hook. And so for you, actually, I don't think you have a hook written down here. So do you want to unmute yourself and just say, like, what do you think your hook is?
Okay, so by hook, do you mean my pitch, like that little elevator pitch?
I mean, your log line, your elevator pitch. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so it's Stassi mixes her blood with paint to create magical art, like youth restoring portraits. But when she discovers a plot to eradicate powerful female artists, she'll risk her forbidden sapphic love and her life to rise against the powerful elite who would silence her.
Okay. So why don't you have that in here? Like,
I currently do. This is a previous iteration,
Okay,
unfortunately.
okay, good. Okay, good. I'm putting you on the spot. Okay, because so for me, the way that I read this one is that where the hook should be, what you have is Latvian mythology and folklore with an examination of critical theory. Like that's where your hook should go. And so you are coming off super academic here when what we need is like that's where the juicy part of the hook goes. So I'm glad to hear that you have a hook, that you have an elevator pitch. Do you want to hear some of my examples? I went through with my query formulas and put together some for you. So I'll run through them, keep them, leave them, whatever. This is also a good exercise for everybody listening because it just shows there's lots of different ways to write your hook in a way that, can service your story in different ways. So last time I went through some examples of the character goal obstacle formula, the character situation complication formula, the character desire conflict formula, the what if question formula, and the irony or twist formula. So I'm going to kind of use those formulas. These are all from my authors publishing playbook, so everybody has access to them there. And if you're not in the playbook, you know where to go to find it. Okay, so let's go through some of your examples. I want to start with the in a world format. So this doesn't work for everybody, but because there's some world building here, I just wanted to run through some examples. I actually think in a world works here. So anyway, I'm going to run through them. In a world where magical art is born from women's blood and power is wielded by a sinister patriarchy, Stassi wants to elevate her social standing and prove her worth, only to discover she must risk everything to fight for the very women her society intends to silence. I kind of like a in a world one here, just throwing that out there. Another one, in a world where elite families exploit and disfigure magical women, Stassi wants to win a prestigious art residency, but she finds herself caught in a deadly conspiracy and a forbidden romance that forces her to choose between survival and revolution. So again, some more examples here. All of our Substack subscribers will see I've written out 5 different examples for everybody to check out and just showing you there's different ways to write your hook in a way that can service the story, service the query letter. You also don't want to make your query letter too long by writing a hook that essentially summarizes the query letter in itself. But I'm glad to hear that your more recent edition has a hook in it because this is a very hooky story. And I think that you weren't doing the pitch justice by just kind of running through the plot points as opposed to let's just start off with something that's really going to grab our attention. So glad to hear that. The word horromance. I am not familiar with the term horromance. It doesn't roll off the tongue especially great. I know on this show we read them aloud. So if it is something where, TikTok is talking about horromance and it's a thing that we need to lean into, then that's fine. But it's, again, doesn't roll off the tongue super, super easily, but, not my business if that works here. My last question is kind of is this YA or adult? Because you call this coming of rage, and I love the word coming of rage. It's awesome. But I'm not really clear on whether this is adult or YA. So I would probably find a way to signal to us which it is in a way that's a bit more clear. I kind of thought it was adult because coming of rage is a pun on coming of age, which is generally more like an adultification look back on our childhood. And we'll get to the pages later where I think it's definitely more YA, but I do think you should probably spell that out a bit more. But other than that, little notes for you here and there, which again, our Substack subscribers will see. But yeah, just my pro hook stance. As always, we need to lead with a hook.
Thank you, Carly. Okay, Tali, we're going to hand it across to you now where you can either answer those questions or ask questions of your own.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that feedback. That is super helpful. So, Carly, in terms of your point of what is the audience for this, so it's interesting actually. I was speaking with an editor at Macmillan on Monday, and she had mentioned that this is very much a crossover piece. So, I had written it intending it to be adult, and that's how I saw it with the themes. But it falls into young adult as well because of the writing and especially the first person and the voice, I think could appeal to young adult. So this editor that I was talking to, I think she primarily focuses on young adult and she said she'd be interested in seeing the project once it's represented. So that was really exciting. But anyway, so I think it does have a crossover appeal. I would probably market it as adult, but is there an ability to play around with that? I know there's the new adult market that you can play to, but do I have to decide at this point who the audience is and stick with that, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think something we've debated a lot on the show and the industry debates a lot. So there isn't one magical answer. I will say there is a level in which you have to commit to something because with you pitching editors or your agents again, and I know you had a conversation with an editor, but your eventual agent will pitch editors. These are completely different categories, often in different buildings with teams that do not communicate with each other at all. Separate marketing departments with separate specialties between kids and adults. So they are very, very different in how they kind of function with their audiences, often the market in terms of like whether library is a primary market for them, for example, or schools. So there's definitely a certain level of needing to commit very early on. There are select imprints that do crossover work, and that is their goal, and I have a feeling I know who you're talking about in terms of the imprints that you're talking to. But when you think about going out on submission with something, sometimes the first round will be 7 to 12 editors, and then again, if it doesn't sell, we go to another round and another round. Like, so we need a basket of like 30 editors to be able to submit to. And so if you think like this is new adult or has to hit a crossover editor, all of a sudden we took, if you could imagine like the diagram where it's like the two circles and they're crossing over. What diagram is that? Venn diagram?
A diagram.
Venn diagram. Thank you. My literary background did not take me all the way to math class. So our Venn diagram, right? Where it's like, this is our adult circle. This is our kidlit circle. How close do these two do this? Like barely, right? They're touching. And so that's the little sliver in the middle where we're attacking that category. And it's just so small. And so I find, in my experience, if something wants to be crossover, it has to be the best at what it is doing and therefore creates crossover momentum because it is then word of mouth and carries itself into the next category. So to me, crossover it's a lot of things, and I think a lot of people want to be crossover. So again, people can call themselves whatever they want, but it's a mix of audience, it's a mix of marketing, it's a mix of positioning, it's a mix of packaging. It's just so many things. So it's kind of a long-winded way of saying I think you need to pick, and I think it's why.
Yeah, I think that I would agree. And that's really fascinating feedback in terms of the actual marketing the book to editors point of view. That's really interesting insight that I'm glad to glean here.
Do you have any other questions, Tali, for Carly and Cece, or any other input based on the query letter before we go to what's in the pages?
I don't really believe so. I want to work my joke about the bear in here.
So
And
Tali noticed that you can tell us what you noticed, and I said it was too late. They already have the pages.
yeah, I was mortified. I was looking at the query letter as I was editing it, and I saw that I had written grizzly as in the bear instead of grizzly as in, scary. So I told Bianca I'd have to work a bear into the manuscript, so it was foreshadowing and not a typo. But that was just
I
my
didn't
little
even
joke.
notice, which
love
tells
me.
you how much I know about that.
Oh my God, we
Bears
are not
love
going
me,
back
just
to
saying.
Bears love you again.
Bears
Cece.
love me. Bears love me. Bears love me, and they would be my friends, guys. Everybody knows this.
Listen, bears as in the gay men also love me, but not the wild bears. So, okay.
No, talk about wild bears. Wild bears.
Okay, right. We
man.
will move swiftly along from there. I would just like to stop here because we are having a word from our sponsor. Okay, right. So, Tali, we are now moving to the pages. Can you please summarize for us what is in those opening pages?
So we begin with Stassi in the halls of her school, and she overhears other students talking about a rumor that some girl was set ablaze. So that catches her attention, and she starts thinking, oh my goodness, what is going on? This must be about this competition that every artist wants to get into. And so she makes her way to her classroom. We learn a bit about Stassi. She's always late. She walks into her class, and her professor chastises her a little bit. And then we find out that Stassi has actually been chosen for this competition where somebody was set ablaze. And her rival is also going to be joining her there. We learn a little bit about the magic system and how it works with blood weaving, which essentially artists mix their blood with paint. They paint subjects before them, and that affects the natural subject that they see. And then at the end of these first 5 pages, a big glob of green paint flies past Stassi's face and lands on her canvas.
Wonderful, Tali. Thank you so much. Okay, Cece, we're going to hand it across to you again.
I am making a face because I have a lot of notes. So I will not be able to share all the notes, but you can absolutely read my notes once you have them and let me know if you need me to elaborate on anything else. Unlike the query letter where I was like, I have no notes, I have a lot of notes. My first note is there are some really beautiful lines. I really, really enjoyed the care that you put into this. I made sure to like highlight the moments where you were like, oh my God, this is beautiful writing. Thank you. Thank you for writing this beautiful writing. I'm going to read one for our listeners. The boom slicing our anticipation like a blade against bone. It's referring to a movement with a knife. It's simple, right? But it's so evocative. The imagery is so powerful. And it's so baked into the scene. Like this is in the middle of like dialogue. So you did a really good job there. And I could see the care that you put into this. So thank you. There were also really good moments of emotional calibration. There's one moment where the calibration's off, but all the other moments, it was perfectly in tune. And again, hard to do. So really want to congratulate you for that. I do have a lot of notes on how to improve this. The first is tone. So Carly mentioned horror romance. I don't know how to say this either. It's very hard to pronounce. I totally agree it does not roll off the tongue. I know it is a thing because I'm obsessed with Isabel Cañas, specifically Vampires of El Norte, but really anything the woman writes, I will read. And it's 100% like a genre. People are obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with it. So I do think we should have picked a better word as a community, but we didn't, and that's fine. The tone isn't there. Like we don't have a horror romance tone, whatever the word is tone. I encourage you to read the genre to see how from the very first chapter, there's that eeriness, that sense of danger. Like we have her eavesdropping. I thought, ooh, there's going to be danger because she's eavesdropping, but there isn't. Her interiority actually tells us, no use being caught. I'm going to be late for class. It's all very low stakes and safe. Like you're keeping her safe, and you can't keep her safe if this is your genre. It read like YA. When I read the query letter, I did not think it might be YA. I didn't catch that. That's on me. But when I read the pages, I was like, this reads like YA. You have to decide what it is, obviously. And I 100% agree with Carly. You have to make a decision. If you try to make your manuscript crossover, 9 times out of 10, what happens is it ends up being neither. So you end up actually losing both markets as opposed to gaining both markets. It sounds unfair. It is unfair, but it's also life. So let's live in life. But the tone and the writing, I think you need to decide what you want it to be. And I can't make that decision for you. I would be more excited if it were adult, kind of like Isabel Cañas. That's my preference as a reader, but this isn't my book. When it comes to interiority, one note I have for you, and this is an easy fix, but you're going to have to go through your whole manuscript. You are clearly writing this for a non-Latvian reader. Like you're clearly writing this for a US reader, I imagine, right? Or Canadian reader. My point is, like, she's saying things like, it's the highest honor, a Latvian artist. Like she's saying things that you wouldn't think. Like I grew up in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I wouldn't think this is the greatest honor that a Brazilian I would just think this is the greatest honor. You don't think to the audience that you're writing for. The protagonist doesn't think for the audience they're writing for. Like the protagonist is in their own bubble. They might say things like, we're talking about a competition, but they might say things like, all of Europe recognizes this honor, or, it's a top honor in Europe or in the world or internationally recognized. They might think that, but you don't keep qualifying your location because it's just normal for her. That's the only place she's ever lived, right? So that's really, really important to remember. And it's one of those tells where it's like, not authentic, Like I get that it's probably your background. I imagine it is anyway. But my point is you're not thinking like somebody who grew up there, and you have to, because you have to inhabit her head. The other thing, and this is really the big note, Tali, I am saying this with love. I'm going to diagnose you. Are you ready for your diagnosis? Not if you are. Shake your head if you are not. Okay, you are. All right, here goes your diagnosis. Drum rolls. You are, my dear, an over-explainer. It's what you are. You are explaining way too much. Like you are going to be tired of reading my notes because in every page, there's like 3 or 4 highlights with me going, why are you explaining this to me? Why are you explaining this to me? And even things like trying to think of a really good example, but when she's thinking about her friendship with her now rival, she thinks back to the little village where they grew up, and you explain where the village is. I'm not going to know how to pronounce the village's name, so I'm sorry, but it reads like this. Once, Wilhelmina and I were friends, two young girls gathering berries in the woods and bathing in sunlit streams near her family's home in Vek Piabala, a quiet village in northern Latvia. Why would you say quiet village in northern Latvia? Like, why? Like, why? Like, let us figure this out. I get why. Like, I know why. The why is you want the reader to know what's going on. You want to do a good job. You want to be a good student and show your work. Do not show your work. That is not your job. Your job is to seduce, not to explain. There are 3 C's that go into every strong beginning: curiosity, context, and connection. You need to tone down the context. Context needs to feel organic. You have to trust that the reader doesn't have to know everything right away. That's part of it. But it's also like, it can't be a situation where you're explaining it to me. It needs to be a situation where it comes naturally and organically. A really good book for you to read for this line is The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. In the first chapter, we have her, the protagonist, letting the reader know that Saloni, the woman that Gita is talking to, Gita is the protagonist, was her childhood best friend. But she doesn't explain it. She weaves it in. She bakes it into the story in a way that feels really, really organic. And when it comes to the world building, especially because this requires so much world building, over explanation can just kill the mood. It removes the reader from the story. It reminds the reader, someone is writing this for my benefit being the reader, and the reader doesn't want that. So the best way to learn how to do this is to read another book. A book I highly recommend is Gutter Child by J.L. Richardson. Take a look at the way the author wove in what the gutter system is. Like, we have references to the gutter system throughout the beginning of the novel. Had no idea what it was. I had theories. I had a notion that the gutter was a scary place and that the protagonist didn't want to go there, and that as much as she was in the school, at least it wasn't the gutter. But I don't know what the gutter is. And when we finally learn what the gutter system is, it's in dialogue, it's super organic, it makes sense. It's not 2 characters talking about things they already know. It's so baked in and well done. So I highly recommend reading that book too, so you can take a look at how to do that. It's going to elevate your craft so much. That all being said, I'm not convinced that you're starting in the right place. There's not enough of disruption. I don't know if you meant for the disruption to be the eavesdropping, but that's low stakes because it's not a big deal. All she's doing is eavesdropping. There's no danger. I don't know if you meant for the disruption to be the fact that she gets the position, right? Her and her friend. But that's like good news, so it's like not super. I think that if you're going for this genre blend, which is honestly one of my favorite genre blends, possibly my favorite, and it's so much fun to read a book that has both horror and romance. Did you notice how I avoided saying the word there, the hard word? I just think that it has to be a different place to start. And I don't know if you have other ideas of places to start. I just don't know, but you have the talent, and I think you should trust your talent and stop explaining, because I promise the reader will get it.
Thank you, Cece. We'll have an opportunity to brainstorm with Tali. And Tali, like, as somebody who wrote her debut that was based in South Africa, I completely understand this need to contextualize and to explain and to orient the reader, especially if you've had beta readers, because sometimes I remember when my debut was being beta read, people would be like, I don't know what this place looks like. I don't know where this place is. And so you tend to put those in to orient your beta readers as you're going along, and then that can take readers out of the story. So I totally get the struggle here and why it's so difficult. We're going to hand across to Carly, and then we'll come back to you, Tali, and then we can brainstorm potentially in terms of disruption. So Carly?
I agree with Cece. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I definitely think we're not starting in the right place, and you're writing this for the reader, not for the story. And I think those are some problems that I would diagnose here. I would think, so I'm trying to think back, I haven't read Mexican Gothic in a while, but doesn't that start with her in a carriage on the way to the house? I'm thinking that might work here better, where it's like she's already, a finalist and she's like on her way or something like that. I think that could work there, because then it's like, I think she kind of describes the landscape in the house like as she's driving up towards it, from what I remember. It's been a while. That could work here a bit better. I think the school setting feels young. Again, if you want it to be YA, it's YA. It is very clearly she's in a school. So that definitely solidifies that. I also kind of felt like this felt a bit more modern than like a 1900s setting. I don't know if that was a goal for it to read a little bit modern, which isn't a bad thing. I was just kind of curious about, yeah, your relationship with it as a historical, because it's essentially, it's a horror romance, but it's also kind of a historical fantasy as well, because there's magical elements in a historical setting. So there's lots of things to play with here. It's very interesting. And I think that's what Cece and I keep like circling around. We're like, this is fascinating. We're sold. Like, you sold us on this concept from the query, from the hook. Like, you got us. And now we're thinking, okay, now we're worried that you're just not writing it in the right way to get the outcome that you want. And I think that's what we're coming up against. So it's always hard, again, for us to read 5 pages and feel like we're giving a full assessment or anything like that, because we're certainly not. But there is often a lot that we can see in the first 5 pages that dictates where we potentially think things might go. So you'll see all my notes in the margin. But to me, it almost felt like she was breaking the fourth wall. Like, that's how much I thought that she was talking to the reader. And so if you want to break the fourth wall, that's a strategy. You lean into that. You carry the reader along and you talk to them, and they're your companion. Like, that's a style. Again, that's a structural, stylistic thing that you can do. But if you're not trying to break the fourth wall, then there's a lot of work you have to do to think about, what can I just like cut, delete, don't need. But I also agree that we're not starting in the right place. So I think we have to start closer to, I always say, we have to start at the most interesting point in a character's life. Starting at the regular day at school, even if the outcome is going to be surprising, you're starting at a regular day at school. And maybe she does or doesn't know that the announcement is going to be made today. Would she have been late if she knew the announcement was going to be made today? Like, I just don't think the interiority was focusing on the right things. I don't want to be late today. Today's the day of the announcement, right? Like, that's a different thing than, I got a little distracted wandering into school. Oh, all of a sudden my life has changed. So I think what is the most, you know better than me, it's your story. What is the most interesting point in this character's life? It's going to be the day she probably shows up at the state, in my opinion. So those are some things that I'm thinking about. You'll see all my notes, but I definitely think it's YA. And I definitely think you have to think about, who is this story serving? And as much as you as a aspiring author want to be serving the reader, which is, again, so much good intention, as Cece and I said, like, we can see all that good intention. You want to serve your future reader, which is incredible. You also have to serve the story, and just like that purity of storytelling, which I think you're thinking about your future reader, as opposed to like, what's the purest version of the story that I can tell? Because your hook is there, your story's there.
I just want to quickly say, you will serve the reader by serving the story. That's how it works. Like, it doesn't look like it, but just serve the story and you'll serve the reader.
Thank you, Cece. Okay, we're going to hand it across to Tali now. Perhaps you can tell us about a moment of disruption that comes later, and we can brainstorm to see if that might be a better entry point.
Okay, so I think that there are 2 potential alternate starting points. So one is the evening of this day when she learns that she's going to be in this competition is when she goes to her brothel for the last time and tells her madam that she's not going to be working there anymore. And a man comes in, he has a raven masquerade mask on, and he warns her against something. It's very unclear what exactly it is, but it has something to do with the competition. So I think that could be a starting point. And then the next morning is when she actually leaves her home and goes to the competition. So I think that could be a starting point. So I'm a bit torn between those 2.
Does the brothel come back at all? Like, is this a recurring theme, or did we leave the brothel behind for the whole story?
It's a recurring theme in that the brothel represents her position in society right now. And at the beginning of the book, she really thinks that she wants to be on this higher rung on the social ladder. Then she learns that the brothel is kind of another way of keeping her stagnant.
Is she a sex worker, or is she like a receptionist? Like, what's her job?
She's a sex worker, so she's a courtesan.
Okay. So I have a lot of thoughts now, because I don't think that is the right spot, but also marrying what you have on the page with the fact that she's a sex worker, or part-time, or whatever capacity, is very complicating. Cece, is this blowing your mind a little bit too?
No, I have an idea.
Oh, you have an idea? Oh, I love ideas. Okay, go, Cece.
Yeah. Okay, this is what you do. This is going to be a very good idea. Get prepared. Your brain's going to explode. She is walking to the brothel. We don't know this as the reader, okay? But we see the anticipation. She has to get work done. She wants to go in and go out and do what she has to do and live this life. She runs into someone from the school, okay? someone from the school talks to her, and through dialogue, we understand she's a student. And so we, the reader, are assuming, oh, the place she's going is something to do with the school. That's the anticipation. That's the urgency. But she doesn't like school, clearly, because she just wants to, get in and get out. And she lies to this person because it's a secret, right? That she's a sex worker. So she lies to this person, very important to lie. And she tells this person, oh, I'm just going to go, I don't know, buy a book or something. Like, you're going to figure out what the thing is, but something inoffensive. And the person gets suspicious and goes, you wouldn't be here to buy a book. You're clearly trying to get an edge in the competition by going to so-and-so's house or something. Like, they have a theory that has nothing to do with a brothel. And so the reader's thinking, oh my God, is that what she's actually going to do? And so the reader now thinks that this person's theory is correct. And because we see her get nervous, she can't find out, but there's actually something more. She gets to the brothel. But again, we don't know it's actually a brothel yet. And then we are surprised, we the reader, by her doing something like, I don't know, taking her clothes off or something. Because it's like, oh, that's not a magical student job description. So now the reader is surprised. The reader has been surprised many times now. But then, bam, there's a second surprise. The person she actually takes her clothes off for, or whatever is it that she's going to do, maybe that's not her style, goes, no, I'm not here for that. I am actually here to deliver you news. I'm just pretending to be a customer. And then they deliver her the news that you just shared. As you were going through your options of where to start, you were focused on information, on conveying information, not what you have to focus on. I have to grab your brain and like pull this urge out of your brain right now, the urge to explain. You're focused on kickstarting the chain of events in a way that honors the information, and that's not your job. You have to focus on a place that's going to surprise the reader with character development and in a way that unlocks layers of surprise. And so I love the idea of her going to the brothel, because that's her secret life. That's what she's had to do. We have a hint of that in the pages where she says, this would ruin me if people found out and stuff like that. Have that urgency, have that really, really emotionally charged scene, but make us think it's something else. And then bam, when we finally have a surprise, we think, now I know everything there is to know about her. But then she is surprised. The reader has been surprised, but now she is surprised by the customer not actually being the customer. That's what I think you should do.
Carly?
I'm just saying, I like the customer not being the customer. I think that's great. It's very magical. I'm just kind of wondering also where the horror elements are going to come in. Because, Cece and I have been talking about like the atmosphere, the eeriness. You have to think about that too. And so maybe, again, this happens at night. It's foggy. Again, get the atmosphere. What Cece said, but atmosphere.
So thinking back to Mexican Gothic, I have to go over and read it again as well to get the actual atmosphere and to see how that was built in there. But that starts with the main character being this socialite, essentially, and talking about how she likes to go to parties and she likes to spend time with boys. And, her father wants her to settle down and she doesn't want that. And I think that she probably gets into the spooky atmosphere quicker than I do. I think that's probably something that I need to rush into a little bit more here. But essentially, that's kind of what I was going for. I was going for starting with, the art scene and she's a student. And then when we get to the estate, that's really when everything kicks into high gear and becomes scary and atmospheric. But I do think I probably need to get into that faster.
It needs to be faster. Carly's point about night and foggy really helps. Notice that in thrillers, even though the danger begins, I don't know, in chapter 3, in chapter 1, you have her like cutting her finger. You have blood. You have something. Like, we need something. Mexican Gothic's beginning, part of the reason why it works is it's a costume party. It's not just her being a socialite. The costume gives it the eeriness. Go read Vampires of El Norte. Go read that chapter 1. All they're doing is meeting outside. Like her and Nestor. It's so spooky. Like, the tone is so spooky. So you have to find that spooky tone. It cannot come later. There's no such thing as, oh, it'll come later. Forget later. Your job is to do it now.
What if she accidentally cuts herself before the reader knows that she cuts herself to combine with the paint for magic? And there's something about like her not wanting to waste it, or it's too early. I don't know. I'd play around with that a little bit, right? Because blood is such a huge theme. And I didn't say this, but I love your title for this book. But yeah, since the blood is such a big theme, I don't know, something about that could also be a little bit eerie. We're like, oh, why is she so abnormally worried about a cut when like everybody else be like, we'll throw a Band-Aid on it? Or I don't know if Band-Aids were around in 1900, but my science background as well as my math background aren't great.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea, actually working the blood in super early because it is definitely a theme that keeps coming back over and over. And I just have to say, Cece, I love that suggestion for the beginning. I'm so excited to write this. It's going to be really good.
Just as an author, Tally, especially considering my last book was sort of gothic, dark and stormy night vibes, from the outset, you've got to, and I'm just going to read this just to give you an idea, because in terms of setting the tone. So it says, Destiny warily eyes her bedside table, which could easily be mistaken for a miniature graveyard, what with all the little pills neatly lined in staggered rows, positioned upright like tiny headstones. So do you see in the opening line, we've got a reference to cemetery, to headstones and things. So it's already setting that tone so that the reader understands this is gothic, this is kind of creepy, there's this underlying stuff. So you really have to, it's not just introducing the horror elements in terms of blood, you also need to be building that tone in terms of the language you choose, in terms of everything, so that the reader starts to get those creepy vibes.
This is, I don't know if you're a Swiftie, but going back to a Taylor Swift album, Midnights, right? Where like the color red and it's crimson and it's like all the different ways to say red or say blood. You know what I mean? It's like, this is crimson, this is that. Like Bianca's saying, it's like, she's not saying, oh, dead, she's saying cemetery and headstones. You know what I'm trying to say? So like figure out all of your words, do a big word map about like what are all the ways that you can say blood or think about blood, and we're infusing, for a blood pun, we are infusing the story like with all those references.
Tally?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's just as you begin writing, for me, it helps to have the vision board as I'm imagining things, imagining it kind of dark. And as opposed to the reader having that picture that you're looking at, you've got to paint that picture for them so that they know it's kind of got that dark filter on everything, or that foggy filter, etc., etc. So as you're writing this new chapter, focus as well on the tone so that you can really try and capture that as well. All right. So Tali, was there anything else you wanted to ask Carly and Cece? Anything else you wanted to brainstorm before we finish up in a few minutes?
Yeah, so I guess two questions. So my first would be that one of my writer friends just approached me, and this is unrelated to the query letter and the pages, but I'm wondering in terms of marketing what your thoughts are. And she asked if I would be interested in doing a race to an agent with her. And so essentially, we would publicize this on social media, and both of us would compete to see who could get an agent first. And I'm torn about this because, on one hand, I think it's a fun idea that would get people following us that might improve our reach and get interest. On the other, I wonder if it's gamifying something that's not necessarily appropriate to look at in that sense. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
I have very strong thoughts about this. I think your instincts are right, which is this is not a good idea. And aside from the fact of like the race to the agent, the gamification, here's something that everybody listening to this needs to think about. When you are trying to build a platform and a brand and followers, what you are trying to do is attract querying writer followers, because like if you were to create that content, the people that would follow you be other aspiring authors, querying authors, not the eventual readers of your book. And this is something that Lee Stein talks about a lot, who's a great author and marketing expert. She always talks about, how am I creating content on socials that serves my goals to attract future readers and the word of mouth that I need? We don't want your word of mouth as an author brand to be the author who did the race to an agent. We want the author brand to be the author of Color of Blood. You know what I mean? So again, all that other messiness aside, really think about like, what is my content serving? Who is it serving and why?
Yeah.
I also wouldn't do it because it's going to be probably the slowest race of all of mankind. It's going to be so boring. It's going to take so long because it takes so long to hear back from agents. Agents are the worst, guys. And it's just going to be like, picture that really slow-mo race, like so boring. Like, don't do it, man. Like, don't do it.
Like slots.
Yeah, that's good to know. So my next question was actually going back to the editor interest. So she had mentioned, I can't endorse you to agents because I haven't read the full manuscript, but you can tell agents that I'm interested. And so I'm wondering how much information to divulge. She's from Macmillan. Do I put that in the query letter, do I put her name in, or do I say an editor at Macmillan? How do I kind of phrase that in a way that's appropriate, essentially?
Was this at a conference?
Oh, yeah, no, it was on a Zoom call, actually.
But like, how did you get on a Zoom call with her? Like through a conference, through a
Like a contest. See, she's just wondering
Yeah.
like the frame of which like you went
Yeah.
into the conversation.
Yeah, I reached out to her
okay.
through Manuscript Academy and booked a call with her. And so we had a Zoom call, and she mentioned that, she liked it and was interested.
Yeah. You can write through a consultation with an editor from Macmillan via Manuscript Academy. I was told that she would be interested in this once I have representation. I have to be honest with you, and I'm saying this because I don't like false hope, okay? Every conference I go to, I meet with editors who are also taking pitches, and the thing they tell me is I always tell writers that once they have representation, they should send things to me if the thing is in the scope they represent. It doesn't mean she didn't like your pages. I'm not suggesting that. I am saying that a smart editor always says, keep me in mind once you have an agent. Because the job of knowing when it's ready is the agent's job. That's not their job. A smart editor's job is to keep those doors open. Like, they want to keep those doors open because it's the agent's job to figure out when your story's ready to submit. Like, they don't have to worry about quality control at all. It's kind of a dreamy thing, actually, now that I think about it. Agents have to worry about that. Agents have floodgates open where we have to sift through the stuff that's ready and the stuff that's not. And then everything that's ready, we send to editors. So it's important to write that because that happened. But I don't even know. Like that happens so often in query letters. I get that line. It's really common.
And if you're wondering where to put it, you put it in the author bio. You don't lead with it because, again, Cece and I see this all the time. Again, it's not a bad thing. It's just tuck it in the author bio. It probably won't get you an agent faster, but to me, it suggests this person paid for Manuscript Academy. Like, they took the extra steps to be serious about your career. So that's why it goes in the author bio paragraph.
Thank you, Carly. All right, so we've reached the end of our episode. Tali, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for making yourself vulnerable and for sharing your work. It's always very difficult. And I think we've brainstormed some really great beginnings for you. And it's just a case of going through your work and seeing where you're putting context, where you're explaining, and it's just taking that out. So for the first draft, it's just going through and taking out all of that and see what remains and then building on that. So definitely doable. I hope we were useful, Tali.
Yes, this was fantastic. It was such an honor to speak with all of you. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been a wonderful experience. Terrifying, but wonderful.
Well, yeah, it is always terrifying because you care about your work. And I always say, if you're not making yourself vulnerable, you're not afraid. And if you're not afraid, then that means you don't care about it. So thank you so much for joining us, Tali.
Bye.
A reminder that this is an unscripted program, and our conversations have been edited and condensed and is not a full picture of our feedback or conversation directly with each author. As always, refer back to our written notes for the fulsome picture. Carly Waters and Cece Lira are agents at PS Literary Agency, but their work on this podcast is not affiliated with the agency, and the views expressed by Carly and Cece on this podcast are solely that of them as podcast co-hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, policies, or position of PS Literary Agency. A reminder about all the ways that you can support us as a show: rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, tell your writing friends about us. We'd love to help as many writers as possible. And follow us on our Substack newsletter. Get our stacked newsletter on a weekly basis, bonus videos, articles, essays, advice, and more. You can find it at theshitaboutwriting.substack.com. That's theshitaboutwriting.substack.com.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you'll join us for next week's show. In the meantime, keep at it. Remember, it just takes one yes.